The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission Audit Subcommittee will now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission Audit Subcommittee for April 27th, 2021. I am Robert Pino, and I am the chair of this committee. As we begin, I will note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by members and city staff as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local public health emergency. This meeting will be recorded and posted to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota open meeting law. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll so we can verify a quorum for this meeting.
Commissioner Crockett.
Here.
Commissioner Sparks.
Present.
Chair Pino.
Here.
There are 3 members present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. Next, we will proceed without objection from the fellow commissioners with the adoption of both today's agenda as well as the acceptance of minutes for March 24th, 2021. May I have a motion to accept both the agenda and the minutes?
Commissioner Sparks, I'll make a motion to accept agenda and minutes.
Commissioner Sparks has made a motion to accept the agenda and the minutes. Would the clerk please call the roll on the motion?
Commissioner Crockett.
Aye.
Commissioner Sparks.
Aye.
Chair Pino.
Aye.
There are 3 ayes.
The motion carries, and the agenda for today's meeting as well as the minutes for March of 2021 meeting are accepted. Next item of business are reports from staff. If we could have Andrew Hawkins deliver this report, if you are here, Andrew.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody.
Right.
On this specific report, it was the 911. There's kind of a number of things that are in play here. So I know the audit, like the city's internal Office of Internal Audit, has a 911 dispatch study that's in their queue because of the DOJ investigation. I think that's one it's not at the top of theirs right now, and so I think they're kind of waiting to understand what the scope of that's going to be, since it's likely something that could get pulled into that. However, the city coordinator's office had also done their 911 dispatching study, and so I believe most of that, or I think all of the updated documentation for that should have been attached to today's materials. And then there was one other part that I could note, because one of the things that was noted by the previous chair of the PCOC was just some interest in looking at the discretionary stop data, which would be stop data that was related to an interaction that wasn't something that was dispatched. So there wasn't something that was observed and an officer was routed there. There wasn't something where an individual had flagged down an officer. And so I had actually spoken to the Commissioner Pino about this in a previous discussion. And one of the things for this, if people have an interest in that, is that there's a very comprehensive stop dashboard that exists on the Minneapolis data source. I can send that link out to everybody as well. And so I think if people wanted to isolate like that type of data, which I also think will be encompassed by the DOJ investigation, generally you have to find some dispatch codes, or not dispatch codes, but response codes that would relate to things that aren't like a clear report or violation of the law. So in this case, suspicious vehicle and suspicious person would be kind of the 2 main categories you'd use to parse down the data. And that's something where, both of those categories exist within this dashboard. So you can select those and then, a date range and basically parse down to get a general population that would reflect kind of what the commission had been interested in looking at. I do have a data set that I pulled that I can share, but I wanted to provide that option as well, since I know there's a lot of different data points out there on all of this stuff. And like I said, I think it's going to be something that's very relevant to the investigations that are ongoing. Commissioner Pino, I'm trying to think, are there any other specific points from this that you wanted me to hit?
No, as far as the MPD 911 working group and our interest in referring calls to 911 or 311, I think that it gives us a broad context of where that's at right now. And I think it's important to, that you brought up the fact that there is a DOJ investigation going on. So this story is by, all intents and purposes developing. And I think it's important for us as a group to be watching and ready for that publication. For the record, I will note that I did put in the link for the stop dashboard. So that way the commissioners and staff who don't already know about it have it available to them. I have no questions myself. Are there any questions from commissioners or discussion on this update? Seeing none, I will direct the clerk to receive and file this report, and this commission is more than welcome to bring it back up on the agenda when we feel an update is necessary. Next item on our agenda is coaching, discussion on coaching. I know that our fellow commissioners were not here for it, but we did have a document that went through the Policy and Procedure Subcommittee back in 2020, which came out of that subcommittee, and then there was a discussion and referral to this audit committee from the larger commission. Bear with me one moment while I also copy that link for members of the public who do not have immediate access to this chat. This is the exact same document that is housed within the agenda for the regular meeting of the Police Conduct Oversight Commission agenda for September 8th, 2020. It is housed as the first link in point 9 under the discussion section, and I am pulling that link from there to just place into the chat for members of the audit committee to look over. This document, like I said, was referred to us. It is written by one of our commissioners, Abigail Sarah, and amended and passed through the Policy and Procedure Subcommittee. And part of that discussion, for me to give a brief overview of my recollection of that conversation, was that there was enough of an interest in trying to understand the fundamentals and the implications of coaching, how it relates to discipline, and what its potential impact could be if there was a change in coaching in some fashion. That it merited a further discussion and analysis by this committee. And it has been our charge from the larger committee to begin that sort of conversation. Before we jump into that conversation in substance, I just want to have a quick reminder of the process for this committee. I know we had kind of a first meeting last time we were here and kind of had a broad overview, but we didn't dive in specifically into what does this process look like. The document of which has been forwarded to these commissioners, but I'm just going to take a moment to really focus in on what I believe this discussion begins with, and what the purpose of this discussion here today on this subject matter should be, limited in scope to. Bear with me one moment while I bring up that. Here we are. And if it is available, I believe it was handed to the clerk, is the document I'm reading from is PCOC study process. Could the clerk tell us if that document is available to show on screen, so that way we have, we can either read along or we can also immediately share it with members of the public when they watch this?
Is this study process versus the research and study manual?
Yes, this is the PCOC study process from the Office of Police Conduct Review. It's an 8-page document.
I do not have, I have not been provided that. I can see if
Perhaps
Andrew.
Mr. Hawkins has
Yep.
that.
I'll put it in. I'm going to put a link to it. It's on our website. 1 second.
Okay, great.
And once that's pulled up, if we want to display it, Ted, if he puts the link into the chat, can you pull that up and display it?
Yeah, I'll bring it up.
Thank you.
Assuming that the commissioners have this document in front of them virtually, I'll say that the main thing that I want to just get across is the 4 points that are shown at the very bottom of page 2. So that way we get an understanding of the order in which we do things here in the audit committee. In that order is defined as follows. 1, project formation, or bottom of page 2. Keep going. Project formation and initial survey. 2, methodology development. 3, field work and report drafting. And then finally, 4, final report and recommendations. If we could go to the page that has the title Project Formation and Initial Survey, right there, perfect. This is, since this is our first time substantively having a conversation about coaching, as well as other conversations we're going to be having this meeting, I figured it is worth a minute or two just to make sure we understand exactly what we should be doing today in this meeting and complete this step before we move on to the next. Project formation and that initial survey. To my understanding, and I'll save you from having me read the 3 paragraphs before us, but it is essentially us being able to determine the feasibility of any research or study on the topic at hand. We first need to get background information. We need to understand the scope of the work ahead of us, and we need to understand how realistic it is to provide answers, and if it is, what the timeline looks like and what we might expect to be able to do with that information once we have it. That project formation and initial survey is a critical, fundamental step in being able to understand, 1, what we're doing, and 2, once we do it, making sure that it's worthwhile. And that is the main goal of what I would like our conversations to be centered around, not only for this coaching study, but for other points on this agenda. Before we dive into the substance, do either of the commissioners have any questions regarding project formation and initial survey? Hearing none, I think we can dive into the substance of coaching itself for a short while. I'm going to save for us going through the whole process because we're not there yet, frankly, with our the topic at hand. So we can save the methodology development and the collection of data and the final analysis for later. We don't need to continue with the screen sharing. So discussion on coaching as the proposed document entitled Proposed Recommendation, Coaching is, quote, discipline and must be treated as such, as well as, and I do believe this has accompanied documentation of the city attorney's office and their legal opinion in terms of coaching. I think taking a step back from either of these two documents and really getting at fundamental questions of understanding what coaching is, how it relates to discipline, you know, and the fundamental process of how we've found ourselves here in the world of what is coaching is important for us to look at. So that way we, as the three members of this subcommittee, have a solid understanding of what we're talking about. And that is something that I think is an important aspect before we even dive into the, approving any sort of analysis or recommendations around this document or amending it in some sort of way. And I welcome either Commissioner Sparks or Commissioner Crockett to share your thoughts on what is an important fundamental questions or concerns that you want to have answers to when we're talking about the concept of coaching and where it's placed in the correction of Minneapolis Police Department officers. I've also just been talking at you guys for about 20 minutes, so I wanted to encourage a little bit more discussion at this point.
I guess a question, is there a like a max amount of coaching that individuals receive?
So I think a good way to just start this off is I'm going to start just writing down questions and seeing if we, start building up a trend of, a package of questions, if you will, that we can really start to explore this topic further and be able to share a well-rounded understanding. And I think that's one of those questions that I think is important. Not just, is there a certain number of, times an officer gets coached, or what is the frequency? Is there a likelihood that an officer is coached once on a particular topic and then they are very unlikely to need coaching again, or is there multiple times where there are instances where it's coaching on a similar subject matter?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Sparks. I had kind of a similar, similar thought. It would be nice to know, as part of this, if we're going to do a study, how effective is coaching in its current, however it's being implemented currently. Are people reoffending, so to speak? Are they learning? I suppose the intent is that they learn from their mistakes and then they aren't making the same mistakes again. But it would be nice to know how effective it is.
Okay, yeah, how effective is coaching? Also, how do we measure that? How do we measure effectiveness of coaching? Is it the fact that there aren't other instances that are similar? Is it the fact that there is some sort of, I'm trying to think if there are other ways that you measure coaching as being effective or ineffective, other than that it doesn't show up again on that individual's report. I'm sure there are.
It might be, I was trying to think of a good way to say it, but so I think the public perception is that a lot of instances of complaints tend to be swept under the rug and don't even go to coaching. So it would be interesting to see if we could get a comparison between how many complaints are made, for example, versus how many of those go to coaching, and if that number kind of changes after an officer is coached. That might be one way to try to gauge how effective it is.
And you sparked an idea here that I think we need to get back at, take a step back at really getting at the fundamental question of how did we get to this term coaching? you know? And I think that's a really important question because it's thrown around a lot in the news media, in our conversations, and other conversations, and trying to get at that process of, you know, there's a reason why coaching is here. Why, you know?
Yeah, and I think, I mean, kind of based on what I've seen so far and a lot of public comment that I hear too, coaching has a tendency to be, I don't know if it's used inappropriately, but we've seen examples of officers berating victims, verbally assaulting people, stuff like that when we do those complaint reviews. And a lot of other commissioners have said, like, I don't know if that's something you can coach to. People with good character don't generally do these things. They don't find themselves in these situations. So is it really appropriate to have coaching for some of those violations?
Yeah, and just having I think it's important for us, just in a more general term, to have a understanding of why coaching is chosen, and also, are there some particular areas procedurally that require coaching, like there's a coaching mandate for particular things, so like the scope of coaching in general. And I will say, as a big old aside for this, I'm sure the commissioners and staff are aware, but for members of the public who may not be, we anticipate having a presentation on coaching at the larger committee later at our next full committee meeting, which hopefully will provide a lot of these answers from the police department's point of view, and the clerk can correct me if I'm mistaken on that. Casey.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you calling that back to everyone's attention. We have arranged for the city's Chief Human Resources Officer, Patience Ferguson, as well as our City Attorney, Jim Rauter, and others to be in attendance at the next meeting of the full commission. To speak to this issue of coaching from an enterprise perspective. Coaching is not a unique term applied only to MPD. It is applied across the entire city enterprise, or we use that word, organization of city government. So that includes all 22 bargaining units, the appointed positions, and the unclassified. And so I think having that understanding is important. The questions I hear you generating, Mr. Chair, I think are good in terms of if this subcommittee can sort of have a list of prepared questions to help guide that discussion at the next PCOC meeting. I think it benefits not only your body in terms of understanding the use of coaching across the city enterprise and how that is done consistently, or what mechanisms are put in place by HR to use coaching across all 22 different departments, but also to better understand, especially within your jurisdiction, how that applies to the Minneapolis Police Department. So these are good questions that I think the city attorney, the city's chief human resources officer, and the representatives of the police department we've invited to participate as well to respond to. It will give you a shared sense of understanding, and through your forum, which is public, will give the community a better appreciation for what is coaching, how is it used in NPD, how is it used in other city departments, what is its purpose. I've also asked the Chief Human Resources Officer to come prepared to speak to coaching as a tool that's used by other jurisdictions. It's not something unique to Minneapolis. So putting it in that broader context or frame of, you know, the state and other jurisdictions and how it's used, I think is informative for your body, and as I mentioned, through your body for the public. I hope that's very helpful.
That is, and you brought up a great point that I will definitely write down on this list of questions, is how is coaching used in other jurisdictions, more appropriately other police departments. And you also brought to my attention as a quick dive into Jackson's notes from 2020, that I wrote down 5 methodology questions once this was referred to the audit committee because I wanted to keep them fresh. And now I'm happy that I did because it's here. So would love to hear Commissioner Sparks or Crockett's opinions on any of these. First was a point of timeliness. What, if any, policies are in place to ensure complaints are reviewed and are investigated and that recommended corrections are implemented in a timely manner in terms of coaching. 2, I think we already kind of touched on this, effectiveness. What evaluation measures are in place to ensure that corrections of any sort, including coaching or discipline, make a difference in an officer's ability to abide by policies and practices. 3, civilian privacy. What protections are currently in place to ensure that whistleblowers are not subject to retaliation by MPD officers once accused, and by whistleblowers, I mean people who complain against, who file complaints. 4, transparency. What is currently preventing all forms of corrective action, coaching or otherwise, from complete public transparency, as long as it abides by the civilian privacy question above. What can the city of Minneapolis do to bring about this transparency, both including and excluding changes at other jurisdictions like the state? And then 5, if the city of Minneapolis were to define coaching differently, what would need to be changed in order to ensure this timeliness, effectiveness, transparency, and civilian privacy to at least the status quo, if not improved upon those metrics? I know that was a lot. But those were things that, at least at the time of referral to this subcommittee, were definitely at the forefront of my mind. And I definitely want to, reading those over again, I want to make sure that those are things, at least, maybe putting the cart before the horse on a few of these, but at least part of the conversation as we continue on down the road here. Do we have, oh yeah, Commissioner Sparks?
I was just going to say that those are very poignant notes. Are those viewable? Like, were those written down at some point?
I don't have a problem.
Or are those like your personal notes?
They're my personal notes, but personal notes are a matter of public record, or so I have been told. So I don't have a problem putting those in the text. Control copy.
Also, just real quick, just for all the commissioners, in 2017, OPCR staff had built out like a coaching overview dashboard. It was a follow-up on previous work that was being done with the PCOC, I think in 2014. So I just provided the link to that. Obviously, it goes through 2017, so it's still fairly timely. But it has a breakdown of various cases, what was coached, what wasn't, what were the allegations. And like I know it was like a fairly substantial amount of work, so I wanted to make sure that got added into this discussion, since I feel like it's probably helpful for context.
Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I appreciate that.
Oh, not a problem.
So on the trying to round things back, and I know we're trying to get through this as quickly as possible with the amount of time that we have allotted. Moving back to the understanding of project formation and initial survey. The three of us have thrown around a few questions of things that we're interested in. Let's have a short conversation about the matter of feasibility, and if the clerk and or staff has any input on the feasibility of gathering information, being able to disclose data, subsequent to what is currently available right now. I encourage any staff, if possible, to kind of help us out here and talk us through where this sort of conversation lies in terms of feasibility.
Sure, I can jump in here. So, I mean, to the note that was made by Commissioner Pino and Casey earlier, I think that this is going to dovetail with the presentation that's going to be made to the group. I believe it's next month or one of the upcoming meeting. So there, depending on like that discussion, that could impact more of this group's work around this topic. But I think for right now, there's no reason that there still can't be kind of an ongoing, preliminary discussion. And so I think that it's important for the group to sort of establish, what are the things we're trying to answer. And I know, like the recommendations and the things that have been discussed previously involve, the use of coaching by MPD specifically, involve, whether or not, like a belief that something like can or can't be done. And so I think some of those are discussions that, it's not my place to weigh in on. This, when it gets into the legal opinion side, that's the city attorney. As far as the process itself, that's MPD. However, I think looking at this, and it sounds like there might be some of this in the next meeting, in the presentation that's going to be given to the PCOC as a whole, but is there an interest in the group on, and kind of determining what does the landscape look like around this? I know that this is something that, there's equivalents in a variety of jurisdictions, or sorry, of other municipalities in relation to law enforcement. It's, do we want to explore how it's used there? What are the criteria for it? And kind of to do a comparison across the board in that respect. I know I just sent it over, but you can take a look at the Tableau dashboard that we have from 2017 and kind of see if there's any opinions that are formed from that. If it's some kind of a follow-up on that, or if that answers enough questions. But yeah, I think that's sort of, my ask to the group is, and it's hard to do while we're still having all these other discussions that might, bring something else to the table that you want to add in. But I think that determining, what the question that we want answered is going to be. So I see Casey's hand is up, so I'll stop talking.
Yes, Casey.
Mr. Chair, I was just going to ask Mr. Hawkins, did I understand that you said the dashboard was current only through 2017?
Yep, it's 2014 to 2017. It was done in.
So it's missing 4 years of data, which would make it current.
Yes, it was done. It wasn't done to be a living dashboard. It was because the way that you have to pull the data, it's not. You can't do just like a clean enter and pull in perpetuity. You have to kind of go through and scrub everything
Sure,
and make sure that.
That's one thing the subcommittee may want to consider is.
Yep.
How it could maintain that dashboard. It would obviously require, some interagency coordination between civil rights, MPD, which house the data and produce the dashboard, IT, which is the back end support, and my office in terms of data privacy and public data access. But that would be one step that this subcommittee may want to make as a recommendation out of its investigation, that an ongoing dashboard maintained specific to coaching would be an important public transparency, public trust tool. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think thank you for the two of you having that exchange that kind of brought that to light. I think from my opinion, up-to-date information is always best, right? And I totally understand Mr. Hawkins is working with the materials that he has, but if we can help facilitate more up-to-date materials and make sure that is something that is recommended in due time, that might be definitely something we can consider. I'm gonna write that down of just saying the dashboard. All right. I think let's just try to simplify this down and then move on to the other points, because I know we're moving through this hour pretty quickly. Based off of these questions and the conversations that we've had, the elevator sentence that I'm gathering from this is we want to get a fundamental understanding of what coaching is, its place in MPD, and how it relates to other jurisdictions, and both including the presentation that we expect to get at our next full committee meeting, but potentially, and I assume questions will come from that presentation as well. Is that? I know that was a very broad and abstract brush that I just painted over all of these more in-depth questions, but is that roughly getting at what this body wants as a foundational formation of this sort of study? It's more of an exploration of understanding coaching as a process and how it relates in the larger external environment.
Yeah, it's Commissioner Sparks. I think you're right on the money for me.
I would agree as well. It's well said. It's the point we're looking for.
Great. That is good to hear. And hopping back to, bear with me one moment, all of these documentations. We can table this discussion for right now, pending the presentation at the full commission, and we can bring this up at our next meeting once we have a better understanding of how we want to move forward and how we want to direct staff to begin that research. No sense in having them attempt to create the same wheel that will be created at our next meeting. Does that informally sound fair to the two other commissioners here? Okay.
Sounds good.
Yep.
Did I miss a report on staff? Bear with me one moment. Oh, I see it here. Okay, never mind. Next item on our agenda is a referral from the PCOC meeting of April 13th, 2021 regarding no-knock warrants and directing this subcommittee to begin the process of a research and study on the topic. Similar as what we just did with coaching and trying to, ascertain both a scope as well as, really just developing discussion questions of what is our interest and how we want to go about it. And I will, step away from the Roberts rules and kind of encourage, again, a more discussion between the three of us. I'll kick things off with, I think that it was a great presentation from our visitors at the larger commission that brought this to our attention. I think it definitely sparked interest in many commissioners of our commission. And I think that if we are to do our own due diligence, I think it would only be fair if we take the presentation and the documentation that was presented to us as a point of inspiration and trust but verify, make sure that we are seeing the same sort of, points that they are seeing, the same evidence that they have presented to us, and then we can start forming fundamental questions of where we're at versus where other people may or may not be at, the gaps in between, where we're succeeding, where we're failing. That was my initial reaction that I had and what I wanted to bring to the table here. Would love to hear perspectives from either one of you on the presentation or particular areas of interest that you think we need to be talking about from a initial formation of this survey.
I thought it was a really great presentation and just something that definitely need to be brought to light. And I definitely feel like there's a lot of kind of holes we can hop into and really see what the reality is, like in reference to how kids are affected or our families or people that are less in the homes, and just like I don't know, a lot of little nuances that I feel like there's an opportunity to really hold them accountable for.
I think that's a great idea, and to try to put it in the form of a question. You specifically pulled out the idea of like family impacts. So can I assume that that's something that like you're interested in particular, of trying to see the impacts on family and youth regarding this?
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Sparks, any input, reflection, questions that sparked in you from that presentation?
No questions. I mean, I'm pretty biased already. I find no-knock warrants to be totally unacceptable, and virtually without benefit. I think it's just a huge invasion of privacy by the state. So I don't have a lot to add other than that, although Commissioner Crockett made a very good point about if we were going to study something like his example was great. The impact on individuals present and children present would be something that's important to gauge and to look at.
Yeah.
You can hold that up as something that I can't imagine that would have a positive impact on children who are present for a no-knock warrant being served, especially if there's gunfire involved.
Mhm.
That would seem like something that's pretty damaging, but it would be an important thing to look at and possibly highlight that, if we're gonna if we're gonna support the city doing these sort of no-knock warrants and basically bursting into people's houses ready for action, that there could be a severely negative long-term impact on the people it's perpetrated on.
Yeah.
And that's something that's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think long-term impacts, and how do we measure that? How do we go about making sure that that is reliable data? How is that data collected? Where would we get it from? Are important questions that we would have to consider there. One thing that I think is, at the end of the day, something that will make or break the acceptance or rejection of no-knock warrants as a policy perspective is its effectiveness. And I would love to see data on whether or not no-knock warrants and the trade-off of not identifying yourself and providing that time for someone to come to the door in a non-combative way actually creates a certain significant effectiveness in safely detaining someone who has at least been some sort of articulation as to why there's been the use of a no-knock warrant versus a traditional process of issuing and executing a warrant. So finding some way to measure the effectiveness of those and see if they're comparable or not comparable. It is the rationale worth the outcomes. Is something that's particularly of interest to me.
Could I add to that quick? Maybe it's a little meandering, but
yeah.
I was going to say too, I think if I remember the last meeting correctly, somebody brought up like something we could look at, for example, would be the just number of arrests that came from no-knock warrants. And I don't remember if I spoke up at that time, but I think that the number of arrests is pretty irrelevant. We've seen certainly with the protests that police will just have a tendency to arrest people for little or no reason. Whether they arrest you doesn't really matter. I would say that it would be arrests compared to what the warrant was written for.
Yes, and I think that's a good clarification. I was not thinking effectiveness in terms of arrests. I was thinking effectiveness in terms of an arrest without the use of force.
Okay. Was it you who made that comment originally? I can't remember. I'm sorry.
I can't remember either.
Okay.
But I was, and I should have articulated that more clearly, of just saying, assuming that an arrest happens, the manner in which an arrest, a person ends up being arrested or detained in some way, is there a difference between the process of a no-knock warrant versus an announced warrant, and is one considerably safer than the other or not? Would be something that would be of interest to me.
And I suppose we should think in terms of safety for the officers as well. Is it safer or more risky for them to execute one type of warrant versus the other? Yeah.
And I think it's important to effectiveness in terms of safety. I will write safety, both civilians and officers. And I see a hand raised. Mr. Hawkins.
Yeah, just so on this topic, I was just going to weigh in from like a feasibility standpoint. I know we've talked about there being kind of a lot that's getting put on the plate of this group. So like looking at it, it's kind of similar to what we just were talking about with like the coaching stuff. I think that meeting next month will be valuable just because, you know, before you can move forward on any of this, I think having everybody operating kind of with the same set of like, you know, the same understanding as opposed to, you know, people coming at it from different angles is super valuable. And so with this, I think you know, it's a super relevant and super worthwhile topic to look at.
Yeah.
But I think it breaks down into two different categories. And I think it's up to the group as far as what direction they want to go. Because I think one of them is a lot more substantive in terms of, you know, a process that's going to take time, you know, like a lot much larger research and study. Still, it's just as valuable, but
yeah.
I think there's also an avenue here that could produce something that's a lot more tangible, you know, within a much shorter period of time. And that would be that kind of taking that presentation as a springboard to, you know, look at, and I think you alluded to this previously, Commissioner Pina, was, you know, taking this and looking at it, you know, whether, you know, getting some analysis just to verify, you know, you know, we found this troubling, like, is there anybody that can respond to this? And, you know, this again, like, you know, NPD can speak to their stuff with, you know, like much more confidence and expertise. But like one of the ones that kind of jumped out to me when it was, you know, it was like, oh, when they reviewed the no-knock process was like, well, there's not a body camera, you know, requirement, but like, you know, however, I'm pretty sure that there's a different requirement for body camera activation in the MPD policy that's just not inherently, it's not also included in this. So I mean, my way of reading it would have been that like, well, it's implied that already had to have happened because this meets the criteria of the other policy. But that's something where like, you know, getting, you know, someone from MPD to speak to that, you know, as a subject matter expert, so that we can kind of clarify like where are the holes. And then also, I mean, you know, it's not any surprise. This is a topic that's, you know, like being studied nationally. So I think there's a lot of research out there already about national best practices. There's a lot of data that already exists. And so being able to maybe, you know, like take the policy once we have an understanding for what MPDs, you know, actually looks like, and, you know, if there's any inconsistencies with, you know, the way that some of these other groups have reported on it, we've got that. And having the ability to take that and compare that to the national best practices, you know, what other jurisdictions are doing, you know, why they're doing it, and identifying any issues, and then being able to kind of put forth, you know, a white paper on that that makes some recommendations where it's like, you know, hey, this, you know, we found this, and that was in line with best practices. That's great. However, here's some areas that, you know, we're troubled by that we'd like to see addressed. I mean, I would think that would be something that could get done pretty expeditiously. And then, you know, however, doing that doesn't eliminate, you know, the idea that you can go in this other direction too with, you know, that would be the deeper dive into the data where it's like, well, you know, outside of the policy now being good and in line with best practices, is this even necessary? What are the outcomes? You know, like what do we still find troubling? Like that can still be an issue even if the policy itself is addressed. So just in trying to, you know, again, like weigh in with my 2 cents for whatever that's worth. Like I think that it's something that's worth considering to make sure that we can, you know, like get something out. So, I mean, this is a very, you know, very relevant to current policing. So, you know, I would assume that timeliness is probably a concern.
And I think that's a great idea, and kind of the initial viewpoint that I had as well, of trying to get something out quickly, but only to the extent that we have a solid understanding of where the city currently is in terms of no-knock warrants, the, you know, how it compares to other jurisdictions, and also what are safe alternatives, what are, you know, what does an ideal, you know, in air quotes, what does an ideal warrant look like? Is there a place for no-knock warrants in that sort of best practice? If so, or if not, why or why not? And really just understanding the lay of the land at a policy level, in addition to the presentation that we've already seen. I'd love for us to, be able to provide our own answers internally, so that way we can go to these sorts of meetings well informed and say, okay, well, we've heard there's, X sort of alternative happening in this other jurisdiction somewhere. What are MPD's thoughts on X? I'm seeing nodding heads. Does that sound like something that would be of interest to do this kind of quick white paper, a lit review of best practices and where MPD starts, where MPD's place is in that sort of process? And then we can consider a more in-depth analysis further on down the road.
Yep, I'm very supportive of that. And I do want to add that I appreciate the group's focus on getting some of these answers quickly rather than holding out for these big all-encompassing studies.
Yeah, absolutely. Commissioner Crockett, I see your head nodding. Sound good to you?
Yeah, I was about to say I definitely second everything you guys are saying. Really getting that white page out there.
Okay.
Be pretty helpful.
Awesome. Well, the one final question before we move on from that would be capacity and responsibility on completing that. Mr. Hawkins, if we could have you back up. You mentioned that that's something that staff would be able to take the lead on for the most part here. And I would assume by our next meeting, since it's being held here internally, it'll be something that we could at least see a draft of a month from now.
Yep, I don't think that's an issue. I think that that's something where, and just to make sure that we're clear and that my understanding is the same as everybody else's. So we want to essentially use the presentation that was kind of like the jumping off point, just to figure out, what's correct, what if there's any nuance to anything, if anything's just incorrect, so that we have that as kind of a base, and then basically taking that and then also kind of including some of the national best practices stuff and data, so that we can sort of look at where there's might be some gaps or where there's some differences, and then that way the group has that to do an analysis of. Yeah,
I'm happy with that if the other commissioners are.
Yep, that's absolutely something that can get done by the next time this group is going to meet, if not sooner.
Okay, thank you very much for your work on that. Any other questions or comments to be made on this new business?
I just want to thank Mr. Hawkins for his taking the initiative on that.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Hawkins. With that, we'll move on to unfinished business and recognize another member of the staff who has been very patient, and I thank her for this. Cassidy, are you still here? Did you have to head off?
Nope, I'm still here.
Hi. And you are here to give an update on the methodology of the trans equity study that we started off at the beginning of last year, correct?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair Puno. I am Cassidy Gardenier. I haven't had the opportunity to meet most of you. Use she, her pronouns. I'm with the Civil Rights Equity Division, and we had stepped in to help provide some support to OPCR related to data. So thank you for your patience. To ground everybody in what this question was, the Trans Equity Council here at the for the broader city of Minneapolis came to give a presentation indicating that they believe that there is underreporting of bias crimes to gender nonconforming and trans folks. And so I know that we only have about 2 minutes, so I just wanted to give you a very brief update. There's a very small number of complaints to review internally to our complaint process. And so I am working my way through those. We wanted to take a random sample to see if any of those complaints had to do with interactions where gender or perceived gender was not taken seriously or documented correctly. So far, we haven't found anything. And so we've shifted our focus into gathering the relevant policies and statutes. And similar to what Andrew talked about, there are some pretty simple policy recommendations that could come out of this. The way that things are reported here at the city on a police report then translated to BCA. Information for the Minnesota Unified Crime Report is different than what the FBI says. There's a lot around perception and officers' perceived race, gender, sexual orientation that's not confirmed. And so the data is a little bit messy. And there are some recommendations around policy that could aid in at least having cleaner data. The other updates are going to be in order to get some clarity around how officers are trained around perceived race and gender when completing reports. Going to be doing an interview with the Commander Blackwell and the training. As you are well aware, it's been kind of a crazy time for everyone. And so this has just been a pretty slow process because it just hasn't been top of mind on my that falls on my plate. So then the last thing that I would say is since we haven't been able to find really anything to either confirm or prove otherwise in terms of if there is underreporting happening, we're going to do a sample of actual police reports in which there were working on how do we sample gender nonconforming, because right now the distinction is male, female, or unknown, and so there just needs to be a little bit of finessing in how we kind of home in on the right cases to see if there is a there. So I know that that is not necessarily moving things forward. I just basically, with what we are looking at right now with the data that's available, there is no MPD is in compliance with the statute that we're looking at, but I think that this commission was interested in a little bit more, particularly related to how community is perceiving this, because there is a perceived experience or an experience of underreporting. And so trying to at least identify where that is in the process, if it's a breakdown of just technical filling out reports, and or if there is something that is happening in terms of training on identification, et cetera. If things are getting lost in perceived sexual orientation, which is also a category. So just trying to suss out so that you all have something to go off of. In terms of best practices, there's not a lot out there because the FBI defines the categories for bias crimes. The male-female binary is what is used by the FBI, and so therefore by the BCA, therefore by our department to align reporting, but that doesn't help us get any closer to figuring out, one, the number of gender non-conforming people who are having interactions with the police, let alone how many are not having bias-related crimes reported. So I apologize that there's not a ton there for you all yet, but we're chipping away at it.
Okay. Well, I will speak for myself in saying I completely understand. This is definitely something that, it's worth digging into because, like you said, it's concerning that we can't find answers, and try as we might, that is part of the problem of not being able to find that information, and it's the wherewithal to start asking these questions that starts that down the road of proper data collection. I have just one question regarding, for the sample of police reports, in particular, do you have a timeline that you have considered on that, and some of the continuing work here?
It has been a shifting timeline. I did have a timeline, but my division just had a staff member leave, and so I'm stepping into the role into a role that is very time intensive at this very moment. But I can do my best to get you something, and Chair Pino, I can forward that on to you that you can then look. I'm hoping in the next by Q2, the end of Q2. But I honestly don't have an answer for you right at this moment.
Totally understand. When you do have an answer, you believe that you could provide a timeline, would you be able to email me so that way we can forward it along to the committee, and then when you are ready, we'll start this conversation back up again.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ms. Gardner?
I have no questions. I just wanted to thank Ms. Gardner for the update and for she and her team's hard work.
All right. Hearing none, thank you very much. We can move along to public comment. The next order of business is the acceptance of public comments. I will open the floor and invite comments from the community. We will limit public comment period to no more than 2 minutes per speaker, particularly because we are 8 minutes past the hour. With that, are there any community members on the line who wish to address the commission? I will remind anyone who is interested, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Yep. Hello, this is Dave Bicking, and I very much appreciate the work you're doing here on all these topics. I just had one a little concern, is that I looked back at the minutes from the previous meeting, and the links on that are all broken. The links, regarding policing in respect to protests, and that's something we in CUAPB are studying right now. So just wanted to mention that in the hopes that those links can be restored by the clerk or by somebody. So, but thank you very much for your work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bicking. We'll take a look at that and on the administrative end, try to reconnect those. Oh, I do see that one of our clerks, Casey, are you able to speak to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Bicking and to anyone else who may be listening, as the city transitioned to a brand new web platform, several of those links from prior agendas, prior meetings that go back from last year and even further back have been broken just due to capacity issues. These are a find it and fix it. There's no cure-all to address all of the broken links, and so we are catching those as we can. So with Mr. Bicking raising that to attention, of course, we'll get to work on fixing those things. But it's just it's not an intentional thing, obviously, and I don't mean to imply that it was. It's simply a matter of moving to a better platform. It has lots of broken links, and so we're addressing those as quickly as we can.
Yeah, totally understand. Well, thank you for helping to fix the links from last month. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that, but yeah, this is March 24th, so it is very recent. It's not from the previous year or anything. So,
yes,
but thanks for working on that. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Bicking. We'll make sure to do what we can, and I will open up the floor to any additional public comment. *6 to unmute yourself. Take a quick look at the participants list. See. One more opportunity, and then I'll close the floor. All right, with that, well, I thank our speaker for their comments. And with that, we have concluded all items on our agenda for this meeting, and I see no further business before us. Without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned.